I remember the moment clearly, though my memory of it is burned into my chest like a brand. The cold marble of Dubai International Airport pressed into my knees as I sat there shaking, starving and utterly alone. I was 14. And my life had been reduced to the size of a backpack I had trusted my brother. 4 hours earlier, everything had been normal. Or as normal as it ever was in a family where I was always invisible. I had waved at my mother and brother as they walked down the jet bridge toward Bangkok, laughing, smiling, alive in a world that had no room for me. They hadn't even looked back. I had waited by the gate, watching the plane taxi, my stomach sinking, my heart shattering, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. My mother, Patricia, the woman who had raised me, who had held me when I was small and sick, who had somehow survived raising 2 children alone after Dad died, had abandoned me. Not by accident, not by mistake, not because she got confused or lost track of me. She had left me behind on purpose. My brother Spencer had orchestrated it, whispering lies into her ear, spinning a story about my tantrums, about my disobedience, about my desire to be left alone forever. She had believed him instantly. She had never checked for herself, and I had believed, even at 14, that my mother loved me, that she would protect me, that she would never could never do something like this. But she had, and now I was alone. Completely impossibly alone. I had no passport, no phone, no money. Everything my grandmother had sent me for emergencies, the $40 tucked in my backpack, was gone, taken by Spencer. My backpack, the one thing that had been a constant companion, a small piece of security in my otherwise invisible life, was in his possession. I could see it in my mind, zipped shut, heavy with my papers, my identity, my hope, tucked into his bag like it was nothing. And the airport stretched around me, vast, glittering, overwhelming. Gold shops I could never afford. Stores that shimmered like they belonged in magazines. Families bustling, laughing, holding their children close, and there I was, a ghost in the crowd, waiting for someone, anyone, to notice that I existed. Hours passed in what felt like minutes and centuries all at once. I cried. Silent sobs muffled by my hands, wishing I could disappear, wishing I could get into the floor, so no one would have to see my humiliation, my fear, my despair. And then I heard a voice. Gentle, calm, and commanding at the same time. 7 words: come with me, trust me, they will regret this. I looked up. A tall man, maybe in his 50s, dressed in a flowing white robe with subtle gold trim, eyes kind but serious, dark and steady, stood before me. His presence was quiet but undeniable. Something about him made me want to believe in safety again, even when every instinct screamed danger. He introduced himself as Khaled Al-Rashid, director of guest relations at the airport, and something in the way he spoke, the way he looked at me, really looked, made me want to tell him everything. And so I did. I told him about Spencer's lies, about my mother's blind trust in him, about how my passport had been stolen, about the flight I had been left behind on. I told him about overhearing my brother talk about a trust fund I didn't even know existed. I told him how I felt invisible my whole life, how I had learned to shrink, to be quiet, to make myself small in the hope that someday my mother might notice me. And Khaled listened, not with shock, not with judgment, but with a quiet understanding. As though he had seen this before, as though he could read the world, and know which pieces were missing. He made phone calls. He moved through hidden corridors and offices with authority and purpose, contacting the US Embassy, airport security, Thai authorities. In less than an hour, my mother and brother's plane, still airborne, had become an international incident. The idea of justice, something I had never imagined for myself, became real. They would be met by police upon landing, and the evidence, my stolen documents, security footage, text messages to Spencer's girlfriend Brittany, would reveal everything. Sitting in that office, warm food in front of me. Someone finally treating me like I mattered. I realized that my father had been right when he called me his hidden gem. I hadn't understood it before. I had thought it was just a pet name, something cute he whispered when no one else was watching. Now I understood. Hidden, not because I was less, but because I had been protected. Protected from those who would hurt me, from those who could see my very existence as a threat to their greed. And now, for the first time in my life, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Not just relief, not just fear power. Not over my mother or Spencer, but over my own life. For the first time, I was going to matter. For the first time, I could see the flame of who I could become, even as the storm raged around me. When the flight landed, when the authorities confronted my mother and brother, when the evidence was laid bare, I felt no triumph, no joy. Only a quiet, profound relief. Spencer's schemes had failed. My inheritance, what my father had set aside for me, was secure. My mother, forced to confront the truth of her own choices, was shaken, broken, finally willing to see me, to hear me, to acknowledge my pain. And me. I was 14 years old, abandoned in a foreign country, and yet somehow, more alive than I had ever been. I had been invisible for so long, and now I was seen. I didn't sleep that night. The city of Dubai shimmered outside the office windows. 1,000 lights glittering against the black sky. And every time a car honked or a plane rode overhead, it reminded me that the world kept moving even when mine had stopped. I was 14, and yet I felt older than anyone I had ever known. Khaled had offered to let me stay in a safe house, but I refused. I wanted to face the aftermath on my own terms. I wanted to decide how I would move forward. The next morning, the embassy arranged for my temporary papers. And the first thing I did was call my grandmother in America. Her voice broke into tears when she realized I was safe, and I could hear the fear and rage in her words. "They can't treat you this way, Molly," she said. "They can't take your life, your future, your dignity, and leave you alone in the world like that." She promised to fly immediately, but I told her no. I needed to stand on my own first, to reclaim myself before anyone else could try to rescue me. When my mother arrived, escorted by embassy officials, I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stood there, 14 years old, taller than I had ever realized I could be, and looked at the woman who had abandoned me. Her eyes were wide, desperate, searching for something she couldn't find. "Molly," she whispered. I didn't," her voice trailed off, guilt heavy in every syllable. I shook my head. "You did. You left me. You trusted him over me, over your own daughter." Her tears fell freely then, and I realized something terrifying and liberating at the same time. I didn't want her apology. Not yet. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted her to admit what she had done, to see the damage she had caused, and maybe, just maybe, to feel the weight of it. But I also realized I didn't need her forgiveness to survive. I had survived already. I had fought my way back and I had won. Spencer stood behind her, looking small, fragile, embarrassed. I didn't mean," he started, but I cut him off. "You meant every word, every action. You tried to steal my passport, my life, my inheritance. You lied, manipulated, and left me to die in a place where I knew no one. And you will answer for it." The embassy officials made the legal situation clear. Spencer had committed fraud, theft and endangerment. My mother's inaction was legally complicated, but morally it was undeniable. I watched them leave, escorted by security, and felt something I had never expected: freedom. Not revenge, not hatred, not even satisfaction, just freedom. The weight I had carried for years, the feeling that I was invisible, worthless, abandoned, lifted, replaced by the realization that my life was my own. In the days that followed, I started making plans. I returned to school, catching up on classes I had missed while traveling. I met other young people at the safe house, kids who had experienced neglect, abandonment, or betrayal. And I realized I wasn't alone. My story, my pain, my resilience, it connected me to them. I began to see the world not as a place that had turned against me, but as a place that had tested me, shaped me, and prepared me to thrive. And thrive I did. Over the next months, I rebuilt my life from the pieces left behind. I reclaimed my father's inheritance, secured legal protection against Spencer and my mother if needed, and found mentors who encouraged me to pursue my dreams. My voice, once silenced, became confident and strong. I learned to trust, to stand tall, to demand respect, and to never, ever let anyone tell me I was invisible. Years later, I returned to Dubai, not as a scared 14-year-old but as a young woman, accomplished, independent, unstoppable. I walked past the airport where I had been abandoned and remembered the fear, the desperation, the hopelessness. And I smiled, because that girl, that scared, trembling girl, had survived. And I had taken everything life had tried to steal from me, and made it mine. The years passed, but the memory of that betrayal never faded. Every time I looked in the mirror, I remembered the 14-year-old girl left, scared and alone, and I made a silent promise. I would never allow anyone to control my life again. My mother's attempts to reconcile were sporadic, awkward and desperate, but I kept my distance. Trust, once broken, is never easily repaired. By the time I turned 18, I had finished school, and the safe house had become more than just a shelter. It was a network of people who believed in me. I started working with an international legal organization, helping other children who had been abandoned, trafficked, or betrayed by family. Every case I handled reminded me of my own pain, but also of my strength. The fear that had once ruled me was replaced by determination. Spencer's name came up one day during a court case. He had tried to run small cons, pretending to invest in businesses, but nothing stuck. When I contacted the authorities, the shock in his voice was priceless. "Molly, you're alive." I thought that I control everything. I smiled coldly. "You thought wrong. I'm stronger than you ever imagined." The media picked up the story, intrigued by the girl who had survived her family's betrayal and rebuilt her life against all odds. Headlines screamed about the Dubai ordeal, the stolen passport, the attempted theft of her future, but I didn't care about fame. I cared about truth and justice. My mother reached out again, this time pleading, promising she had changed, that she had realized her mistakes. I met her once, in a quiet cafe in London, away from cameras and witnesses. She looked older, smaller, the weight of guilt pressing down on her shoulders. "Molly, I never realized." Her voice cracked. I let her speak for a moment, then I said firmly, "You left me behind. You let him steal from me. You chose him over your own daughter. That cannot be undone. What can be done is acknowledgement and accountability." She nodded, tears streaming, and for the first time, I allowed a flicker of compassion. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not yet, but understanding that even the people who hurt us are human, flawed, and sometimes incapable of seeing the harm they cause. Meanwhile, I was thriving. I started my own company helping young women escape dangerous family situations, offering them legal, emotional, and financial support. My story became a beacon for those who had been silenced, overlooked, or abandoned. I spoke at conferences, worked with international agencies, and slowly, quietly, reshaped my life into something far greater than what I had lost. The moment of true triumph came when I returned to Dubai, not as a frightened child, but as a confident, successful woman. I walked the streets where I had once felt invisible, met friends who had helped me survive, and finally confronted the emptiness that had haunted me for years. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt power, independence, and freedom. And then the ultimate shock: my mother reached out publicly, claiming she wanted to reconcile and recognize my achievements. The media called, expecting a story of tears and reunion, but I gave them something else. I stood tall, spoke clearly, and said, "I survived not because of my mother, but despite her. I thrive because I refused to be controlled, manipulated, or abandoned." This story is not about betrayal, it's about resilience, strength, and reclaiming your life when the world turns against you. The world listened, and for the first time in my life, I realized that my past, no matter how painful, was no longer my prison, it was my power. The little girl left in Dubai had grown into a woman who could face anything, who could forgive without forgetting, and who could turn betrayal into a story of triumph. Spencer never tried to contact me again. My mother, though occasionally reaching out, learned that I no longer needed her protection, guidance, or validation. I had become my own guardian, my own hero, and my own voice. And every time I reflect on that journey, from a lost, scared child in a foreign city to a woman commanding her destiny, I feel a quiet, unshakable pride. I did not just survive, I overcame. I reclaimed my life, my identity, and my future. And no one, not my brother, not my mother, not fate itself, could ever take that away from me again. Life after reclaiming my freedom was not easy, but it was mine. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Every day I worked, I built programs to help children and teens abandoned or betrayed by those they trusted most. I met young girls and boys who reminded me of myself at 14, alone, confused, and terrified, and I became their anchor, their proof that survival was possible. One evening, while reviewing case files in my London office, I received a message from an unexpected source, an old friend from Dubai, Amina, who had helped me navigate the city when I first got stranded. She had stayed in touch over the years, quietly watching my progress. "Molly," she wrote, "you need to see what's happening back home. There's a situation that only you can handle." Curiosity and duty pushed me to act. I flew to Dubai immediately. And what I found was worse than I remembered: a group of children being exploited by a network that preyed on families like mine once had. They were scared, desperate, and isolated. My heart ached, not just for them, but for the little girl I had once been. I coordinated with international authorities, local NGOs, and lawyers to dismantle the network. Each rescue operation brought back memories of my stolen passport, my fear of being trapped, and the helplessness I had felt. I moved with precision, compassion, and unwavering resolve. For these children, I became more than a savior. I became proof that one person could make a difference. During the operation, I encountered a man who tried to manipulate me, claiming he was my long-lost uncle. Something in his eyes, a familiar arrogance, set off alarms. It was Spencer. He had resurfaced, trying to profit from this new situation, hoping to manipulate my compassion into weakness. But I was no longer the scared 14-year-old girl who had once been at his mercy. "Spencer," I said calmly, looking him straight in the eyes, "calm controlling me ended years ago. Step aside, or face consequences." He smirked, but when law enforcement stepped forward, he faltered. For the first time, he realized the game had ended, and that I was no longer a pawn. The rescue operation concluded successfully, and I returned to London with a renewed sense of purpose. Every life saved, every family reunited, was a personal victory. I had transformed my pain into action, my fear into power, and my betrayal into mission. Even with all the success, the shadows of my past lingered. My mother continued reaching out sporadically, each attempt tinged with regret. But I maintained my boundaries, protecting my autonomy, while acknowledging her humanity. I had learned that closure doesn't always mean forgiveness. Sometimes, it simply means claiming your peace, and refusing to let the past control your present. Over the next few years, my work expanded globally. I spoke at United Nations conferences, collaborated with governments to create better protections for children, and trained countless volunteers. Every young person I helped was a reminder of what I had once been, and a reminder of how far I had come. One day, while giving a lecture in Dubai about child protection and personal resilience, a young girl approached me after the session. Her eyes were wide, her voice trembling. "You were like me?" she asked. I smiled gently. "Yes, And if I can survive, so can you. You are stronger than you think, and your future is yours to claim. That moment crystallized everything: the betrayal, the fear, the loneliness. They had forged strength, resilience, and courage. My story was no longer just about me, it was about every child who had ever been left behind, underestimated, or stolen from. Returning home that evening, I felt an overwhelming sense of completeness. I wasn't defined by the people who had failed me or the obstacles that had been thrown in my path. I was defined by my choices, my courage, and my refusal to be victimized by circumstances I could not control. Spencer faded into irrelevance, my mother accepted the distance, and the girl I had once been, the frightened 14-year-old in Dubai, finally had a voice that spoke not of fear, but of empowerment, not of loss but of triumph, and in that voice, I could hear the echo of every child, who would now know that survival was not just possible, it was inevitable if they refused to surrender to those who sought to take their future away. Time moved forward, but the echoes of my past never fully disappeared. They were a quiet hum beneath my daily life, a reminder of the girl I had once been. I continued to travel, speaking to governments, schools, and NGOs. Each story I shared resonated with someone, and each survivor I met reminded me why I had fought so hard to reclaim my life. Then came the letter. It was hand-delivered to my office in London, sealed with a stamp from Dubai. My heart skipped a beat before I even opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in my mother's shaky hand. Molly, I know I hurt you, and I cannot undo the past. I am sorry, more than words can convey. I wish you could forgive me, but if you cannot, I understand. I hope someday you find peace. Love, Mother. I folded the letter slowly, feeling the leak in my chest, the pain of betrayal mingled with a strange warmth. Years of anger and grief had built a fortress around my heart, but now I felt a crack, a fragile opening. I did not rush to reply. I did not promise forgiveness I wasn't ready to give. But I let the letter sit on my desk, a symbol that reconciliation was possible, even if it was not immediate. In the months that followed, my life took another unexpected turn. During a conference in Geneva, I met Thomas, a psychologist specializing in trauma recovery. He had a calm presence that seemed to steady the chaos around me. He understood that my story was not just about survival, but about transformation. And he encouraged me to explore not only the impact I had on others, but also the healing I deserved for myself. We spent hours discussing the past, the betrayals, and the resilience it had forged. Slowly, I began to understand that healing not meant forgetting or excusing, it meant reclaiming my narrative. It meant acknowledging the pain without letting it define me. With Thomas's guidance, I started to process the layers of trauma I had carried for decades. Meanwhile, my advocacy work continued to expand. I launched an international foundation dedicated to helping children trapped in exploitative situations, using technology to connect them with legal aid, psychological support, and safe havens. The foundation became my legacy, a living testament to survival, courage, and justice. And yet, despite all the progress, the shadow of Spencer lingered. He had resurfaced in whispers, attempting to manipulate my organization's network, seeking financial gain from the children we were trying to protect. This time I was ready. I worked with authorities and a skilled team of investigators to uncover his schemes. When he finally confronted me, I no longer felt fear. "You think you can stop me?" he sneered. "I don't think," I replied evenly. "I know." The law finally caught up with him. He was arrested, his schemes dismantled, and for the first time, I felt complete closure. The man who had once stolen my passport, my trust, and nearly my future was gone from my life, not by my vengeance, but by justice. And I realized something crucial: my power had never come from hurting him back. My power came from refusing to be broken by him. Years later, standing in a classroom full of children in Dubai, I looked at their faces, bright, curious, and unafraid. I saw myself in their eyes and felt an unshakable pride. the girl who had been abandoned at 14, had grown into a woman who could change the world. I received a message from my mother again, this time asking if she could visit. I paused, thinking about every hurt, every betrayal, every night I had spent alone. Then I made a choice, not for her, but for me. I replied, "Come. We will meet and we will speak, but only as equals." The day she arrived, we sat across from each other in a quiet cafe in London. The conversation was painful, honest, and raw. Tears were shed, words were spoken, and slowly, a fragile bridge began to form. It was not perfect, and it would never erase the past, but it was a beginning. As I walked home that evening, I realized that my story was no longer just about survival or betrayal. It was about transformation, empowerment, and the courage to reclaim one's life despite the darkest of beginnings. The 14-year-old girl, left in Dubai, had endured horrors no child should face, but she had emerged not only alive but stronger, wiser, and unstoppable. And in that strength, I knew one truth: the future was mine to define, and no one, not my mother, not my brother, not anyone, could ever take it away again. The months after my meeting with my mother was surreal. I had spent years running from pain, from betrayal, from the memories of being abandoned in Dubai, but now, for the first time, I felt a sense of calm. Not complete peace, that was still too far away, but a calm that came from knowing I had reclaimed my life entirely. The foundation I had built was thriving. Children who had been trapped, silenced, and alone were now learning, laughing and dreaming. Their families, once torn apart by neglect or exploitation, were being reunited with the help of social workers and legal teams. Every success story was a reminder that my suffering had not been in vain. It had shaped me, yes, but it had also given me the tools to save others. And then came the unexpected twist that would test everything I had built. My brother, the one who had stolen my passport and tried to claim my future, resurfaced, not as a victim, but as a man desperate to reclaim what he thought was his. He appeared at an international charity gala I was hosting in Dubai, brazen, arrogant, and dangerous. "You think you can live without me in your life?" he sneered as I approached. "I don't think." I said calmly the same words I had used years before. "I know. And I know what you are capable of, but I also know what I am capable of. And it's more than you can ever imagine." The confrontation was tense, public, and raw. I could see the shock in the eyes of the attendees as he tried to intimidate me, but I refused to back down. Lawyers on security, already briefed on his prior actions, were ready. The authorities arrested him on the spot, uncovering financial fraud and a history of manipulations that reach far beyond our family. Justice, delayed but inevitable, had arrived. Afterwards, I walked out onto the balcony overlooking the city lights of Dubai. Memories of the 14-year-old girl who had once been abandoned here came flooding back, the fear, the confusion, the loneliness, but they no longer held power over me. That girl had survived. That girl had grown. That girl had transformed into someone who could change the world. My mother reached out again, this time with no demands, only a quiet presence. Over time, we rebuilt a fragile connection, not perfect, but human, honest, and real. I forgave her in my own way, not for her sake, but for mine, to release the grip of old pain. And finally the ultimate realization hit me: life's cruelty had once tried to define me, but it had failed. Every betrayal, every abandonment, every stolen dream had been transformed into fuel for my purpose. I was no longer a victim, I was a survivor, a leader, an advocate, and a woman who had reclaimed everything the world had tried to take from her. The foundation became a global network. Children in the most dangerous regions found safety. Former victims became advocates themselves, teaching others that survival was not the end, it was the beginning. I traveled the world, not just as a survivor, but as a symbol of resilience and hope. One evening, standing on a stage in front of thousands of people at an international human rights summit, I shared my story, not to evoke pity, but to inspire courage. I spoke of betrayal, abandonment, fear and pain, but also of the strength, determination, and transformation that had followed. As I looked out over the crowd, I realized something profound. The 14-year-old, abandoned in Dubai, would never have imagined this life. She would never have imagined that the very people who tried to steal her future would be powerless against her. She would never have imagined that one day she could look at the world and say, with every ounce of certainty, that she had won, not by vengeance, not by anger, but by refusing to be defined by the cruelty of others. And in that victory, I found freedom. Freedom from Frida. Freedom from pain. The past. The future was mine, fully and irrevocably, and no one, not my brother, not my mother, not anyone, could ever take it away again. The lights dimmed, applause filled the room, and I smiled, not the smile of someone who had endured suffering, but the radiant smile of someone who had transcended it. My story was no longer about abandonment or betrayal. It was about survival, empowerment, and the unwavering truth that even in the darkest moments, a human soul can rise, shine, and transform the world around it. And as I walked off the stage, I knew the girl who had once been left behind in Dubai had finally arrived, whole, unbroken, unstoppable and free.